George Edward Wright, born March 29, 1943, is a Portuguese citizen of American origin, known for taking part in the hijacking of Delta Airlines Flight 841. Originally arrested and convicted for murder in 1962 and sentenced to up to 30 years in prison, George Wright escaped from prison in 1970 and hijacked a Delta Airlines flight in 1972 with a number of accomplices. On September 26, 2011, Wright was arrested in Portugal. The FBI requested his extradition from Portugal to the United States, but the request was denied on the grounds that Wright is a Portuguese citizen. Early life. Wright was born in Halifax, Virginia on March 29, 1943. In 1961, he graduated from Mary Beth Union High School. New Jersey offenses. Murder conviction on Friday, November 23, 1962, the day after Thanksgiving. George Wright, then 19 and from East Orange, New Jersey, and 3 accomplices: Walter McGee of Sylvan Avenue in Asbury Park, Elizabeth Roswell, McGee's live-in girlfriend, and Julio de Leon of Monroe Avenue in Asbury Park, were involved in the commission of multiple armed robberies. The 4 suspects first robbed the Sands Motel in Englishtown of $200. They then made their way to the Collingswood Esso gasoline station on eastbound Route 33 in Wall. At around 9:25 p.m., during the second robbery, McGee fatally wounded Walter Patterson, a 42-year-old World War II veteran and Bronze Star recipient who lived in Howell. Patterson was a father of 2 teenage daughters. Patterson, who earlier that evening had relieved his brother Harry C. Patterson Jr. and sent him home to have dinner with his family, was taken to Fitkin Memorial Hospital in Neptune, where he died from the gunshot wound 2 days later. Wright, armed with a sawn-off .22 caliber rifle, and McGee, armed with a .32 caliber pistol, were both wearing women's pantyhose over their faces when they assaulted Patterson. McGee fired 2 shots during the robbery. Patterson was shot once in the abdomen before the 4 got away with $70 in cash. Police later determined it was a shot from McGee's pistol that led to Patterson's death. The 4 were arrested 2 days later. On December 13, 1962, Wright was indicted on state charges along with his associates. McGee, as the triggerman, was charged with Patterson's murder and sentenced to a life prison term in February 1963, but was paroled in August 1977. Wright, as one of the hold-up men, was also charged with murder. On February 15, 1963, Wright reportedly changed his plea from innocent to no contest to the charge of murder, in order to avoid a jury trial that could have resulted in the death penalty. Wright was subsequently sentenced to 15 to 30 years in prison. Escape from prison on August 19, 1970, between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m., after serving over 7 years and 6 months of his sentence, Wright joined 3 inmates and just walked out between bed checks from a state prison farm at Leesburg State Prison, now known as the Bayside State Prison in Leesburg, New Jersey. Wright escaped with his future hijacking accomplice, George Brown, who was serving a 3 to 5 year sentence for a 1968 armed robbery conviction. They allegedly stole the prison warden's car to get away. They made their way to Detroit, where they became affiliated with the Black Liberation Army. On August 26, 1970, federal complaints were issued in Atlantic City, charging Brown and Wright with unlawful flight to avoid confinement. Federal offenses: hijacking and extortion. On Monday, July 31, 1972, Wright, then 29, together with George Brown, then 28, of Elizabeth, New Jersey, alias Harry Singleton, with whom Wright escaped from prison; Joyce Brown, aka Tillerson, then 31, of Spartanburg, South Carolina, accompanied by her 2-year-old daughter Melvin McNair, then 23, born in Greensboro, North Carolina; Jean Carol Allen McNair, then 25, from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, accompanied by her 1-year-old daughter and 2-year-old son, boarded Delta Airlines Flight 841 in Detroit. The DC-8 flight was bound for Miami. Wright was dressed allegedly as a priest and, using the alias the Reverend Larry Darnell Burgess, he smuggled a handgun aboard the flight and a hollowed-out Bible. One passenger described the apparent ringleader as a black man, about 30, wearing a black mohair suit, which others described as a clerical outfit. The pilot of the hijacked Detroit-Miami flight, Captain William Harold May, then 41, and a 20-year Delta employee, said Wright was the group's leader. The hijackers, allegedly members of the Black Liberation Army, seized the plane as it approached Miami, where they demanded that FBI agents, dressed only in bathing suits, deliver $1 million ransom to the plane. The FBI complied. The hijackers allowed the 86 hostage passengers to leave the plane in Miami, but kept the flight crew. They then ordered the plane to fly to Boston, where they refueled and took on an international navigator. They then directed the plane to Algiers, where they sought political asylum since the Algerian government had shown compassion towards revolutionaries. May told reporters that 2 of the hijackers smoked marijuana continuously during the flight, and commented, "They said they were revolutionaries, that America is a decadent society and they didn't want to live here anymore." Upon arrival in Algeria, Melvin McNair had parting words for his pilot. "We're famous," he said. "Send us a copy of your paper." On Wednesday, August 2, 1972, federal complaints of air piracy charges were filed in Miami, naming the 5 accomplices as defendants. Asylum in Algeria. Wright and his associates were briefly taken into custody but were released after a few days. Reportedly, Wright and his group were taken in by the American writer and prominent Black Panther Eldridge Cleaver, whom Algeria's sympathetic socialist government allowed to open an office. Cleaver wrote an open letter to the then Algerian president, Houari Boumediene, in part, "In humbleness and all sincerity, I think it would be consistent with the Algerian tradition of struggle and revolution to continue welcoming American revolutionaries, whether they come to your shores or your airfields, penniless or with millions of dollars. To carry out our struggle for the liberation of our people, we must have money. Without the money to finance and organize the struggle, there will be no freedom." This hijacking represented the final test of the Third World nation's commitment to supporting some contingents of the African American freedom movement. At the request of the U.S. government, the Algerian government confiscated and returned the $1 million in ransom money to the U.S. After the hijackers' calls to have the ransom money restored to them were ignored by the Algerian government, Wright and his associates disappeared. Allegedly, in early 1973, the group traveled by ship to France and lived and worked there with new identities. Apprehension and refused extradition of accomplices. On May 26, 1976, Wright's 4 associates were located in Paris and arrested by the National Police for carrying false U.S. passports. Facing extradition to the United States, the 4 issued an appeal to the French people on October 11, 1976, claiming that while they were ready to face the consequences of our act, they could not expect a fair trial in America and would be condemned to spend the rest of our days in infernal prisons. French authorities declined the American extradition request in November 1976, holding the 4 defendants in Fleury-Mérogis prison, awaiting trial on hijacking charges. On November 24, 1978, the 4 were convicted by a French court for the hijacking. All received 5-year sentences, but 2 years were suspended from the women's terms. In the United States, they would have faced a minimum of 20 years. The jury had found them guilty but noted extenuating circumstances. George Brown and Melvin McNair were released in 1981. In 2012, a documentary titled Melvin and Jean, An American Story was made by director Maya Wexler. Melvin McNair and his wife, Jean, work at an orphanage in Cannes, where reportedly they have turned their lives around completely. McNair also coaches youth in baseball. In 2010, a documentary titled Nobody Knows My Name was made about the hijacking. According to Michael Ganona, producer of the film, Wright's hijacking accomplice, George Brown, lives in Paris, but isn't worried about being extradited because he has already served his sentence. Extradition. In a similar prelude in Hijacking, the Flight 841 hijacking was a copycat of a similar incident 2 months earlier, involving the hijacking of Western Airlines Flight 701 from Los Angeles to Seattle on June 3, 1972 by Willie Roger Holder, a black Vietnam veteran, and Catherine Marie Kirko, his white girlfriend. The hijackers claimed they had a bomb in an attaché case and demanded $500,000. After allowing all 97 passengers to get off in San Francisco, they flew to Algeria where they were granted political asylum. The Algerian government confiscated and returned $488,000 of the ransom money to U.S. officials. On January 25, 1975, the two hijackers, carrying passports under the names Levi Forte and Janice Ann Forte, were arrested on illegal entry charges by French police. On April 15, 1975, a French court refused a U.S. extradition request for the pair on grounds the hijacking was a political act. In July 1986, French authorities moved to deport Holder to the U.S. after he completed his sentence for 1984 assault charges. Kirko went missing, was never extradited, and her whereabouts and status remain unknown. Life after hijacking. After the apprehension of his 4 accomplices, Wright remained the lone hijacker at large. Wright is known to have made his way to France, Guinea-Bissau, and finally to Portugal. While living in Guinea-Bissau in the 1980s, Wright allegedly used his real name and worked as logistics manager of the Belgian nonprofit Isles de Paix. Apprehension. On September 26, 2011, Wright was arrested in Aljuera-Martins, Portugal after 41 years on the run, as the result of a combined task force that introduced cold case evidence from New Jersey. The task force matched Wright's fingerprints from the New Jersey prison with the fingerprints on the ID card issued by the Portuguese government. The United States sought his extradition, with the possibility that he would finish the remaining 22 years of his sentence. However, the request was denied on the grounds that Wright is a Portuguese citizen. Life in Portugal. Wright, who lived under the name of José Luis Jorge dos Santos, had no known occupation, but allegedly at one point owned a barbecue chicken restaurant, sold items at a stall along a popular tourist beach, worked as a bouncer at a local bar, and, similarly to Melvin McNair, coached youth in basketball. He married a Portuguese English translator who was 13 years younger and, together, the couple had 2 children. His neighbors knew his first name was George, but did not know his history, assuming he was African, not American. See also Aircraft hijacking. List of aircraft hijackings. List of fugitives from justice who are no longer sought. Notes 8. In a process similar to what is called offered plea. References